Welcome to Substance Free 02043, brought to you by Hingham Cares. I'm Kristen Arute, your host, and I am President and Program Director of Hingham Cares. Our mission is to reduce substance use among youth in our community. We all want our children to make safe and healthy choices around drugs and alcohol. My guests today are Aileen Walsh and Liz Miller. Welcome, Aileen and Liz.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
So, Aileen, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about how long you've been working for Hingham and what brought you here?
I have been working for Hingham for almost 5 years now, approximately. I was working under a grant for DMH for 2.5 years. Part-time, I worked with Hingham and Weymouth Police. And then in the last 2.5 years, I've been full-time working just alongside Hingham.
Great. Liz, how about you? How long have you been in Hingham and what brought you here?
I have been in Hingham for a year in January. I have worked in the substance use field for about 7 or 8 years in different roles and in different treatment centers and kind of treatment modalities, and saw the opportunity in Hingham to do something a little bit different and get involved with the opioid abatement funds that the town is getting. So about a year.
So Liz, your title with the Board of Health is Social Worker and Substance Use Program Coordinator. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do for the town?
Well, I do wear many hats. I am the social worker for the town, which means that I do a lot of case management and referrals for any resident of the town. I don't turn anybody away, so when I do office hours in various locations, if I do have somebody come to me that doesn't live within the town of Hingham, I do give them resources or find out if there's a social worker in the town that they're coming from, but I don't necessarily turn them away because they're not a resident of Hingham. I collaborate with a lot of the different departments within the town of Hingham in order to also receive referrals from them and then engage with the residents and provide them with the best services possible. And then as substance use program coordinator for the town of Hingham, I work with our town manager and our select board. I advise them on what would be the best uses for those opioid abatement funds and then implement the programs that we come up with. So we just recently put out a scholarship opportunity for residents of the town of Hingham, as well as children that or young adults that have a parent that lives within the town of Hingham that are looking to further their recovery within a sober living environment and can't quite afford it. So we have opened up that. We do a lot of education. We're looking to expand what's available to residents of the town of Hingham, but also abide by the opioid abatement terms, which are set by the state as to how we can spend the money.
For those who are unaware of what that is specifically, could you describe the opioid abatement funds, where they come from, what they're used for, that sort of thing?
The Attorney General sued large pharmaceutical companies that contributed to the opioid epidemic, and in turn, the state and each city and town within the state of Massachusetts received funding to combat the opioid epidemic or to prevent overdoses, really just to reduce the harm that it's had on all of our communities. So the 4 main buckets that the money kind of fall under as to how it can be spent are prevention, harm reduction, treatment, or recovery. There's longer language terms as to how it can be spent, but we do our best to abide by those, but also implement programming within the town.
And how can someone who's listening to this podcast and is curious to know more about the recovery piece and the funds that are available potentially to them for programs, how can they find out more?
So they can definitely get in touch with me. I'm available by phone or by email. You can also call the town hall and they'll forward you over to my desk phone. Or our funds are available through Resources for Recovery. They're implementing our scholarship program. That website is resources4recovery.com. There is an application on that site for residents or a person that has a parent that lives within the town of Hingham, you can fill it out. It gets forwarded to me and also to Amy, the woman that runs Resources for Recovery. We review that and then have a phone conversation with the applicant and then decide whether to administer the funds or not.
So you've touched on your background and what brought you to Hingham. Can you go into a little more depth about your educational background, training, previous positions that you've held that are similar to what you're doing right now that kind of led you to where you are?
I graduated from Bridgewater State. I went to Bridgewater State with the intention of being a special education teacher. That was my true passion all through high school and what I told myself I wanted to do. I completed my first semester at Bridgewater State and decided teaching wasn't for me. I thought that social work might be a way to still work with individuals that have special needs, but not in a teaching setting. Little did I know that I would get to my junior year at Bridgewater State and be assigned an internship at Manic Community Health Center in Quincy doing street outreach for the homeless population.
Wow.
And doing HIV and STD testing in different treatment centers and really just engaging with a population that has different behavioral health needs and really struggles with substance use and just a wide variety of issues. So that was my kind of entrance into this field. And my senior year at Bridgewater State, I entered into my internship at Seven Hills Behavioral Health in New Bedford. So it's a day treatment program for individuals that are living in group homes or like assisted living settings that needed somewhere to go during the day with kind of group therapy, individual therapy. And we provided meals, lunch, and snacks. Really just a place that they can engage with one another, but also get that therapy and those connections with other individuals that they really needed. So seeing the side of what is or what are people that are really struggling and kind of in the worst positions, of their lives to being in kind of a treatment setting, I sort of fell in love with the work all over again and really pushed that want to work with individuals with special needs to the side and continued on that journey. So I graduated from Bridgewater State and went to work for High Point Plymouth, which is an inpatient detox and stabilization setting, and then went to work at Massac in Plymouth, which is a Section 35 facility. So that's involuntary treatment that's court ordered. So I got the involuntary versus voluntary experience and then went and worked for an outpatient setting, which was a methadone clinic in Wareham, and also spent a time as a clinician in New Bedford at another methadone clinic. So seeing, the inpatient versus the outpatient, the voluntary versus the involuntary, I wanted to do something different and still be in a position to help people, but not really in a treatment setting. Getting that experience, coming and working for a town is definitely completely different than anything that I've ever done. But I think it allows me the opportunity to really be creative with my time and also not just focus solely on substance use, but focus on the entire person and their needs overall, which is nice.
Aileen, so you are the Community Crisis Response Clinician working with the Hingham Police Department.
Yes.
Could you describe what you do in that role and professionally what brought you to that place?
So in that role, I would ride along with officers. I will arrive at any scene going to behavioral health or mental health calls. I will do follow-up on the calls if I'm not there, providing referrals to any kind of treatment programs that they might need. A lot of times I'd work collaboratively with Liz if they need referrals later on. She will, help get those in place for us. I do a lot of court involvement stuff. So if I have a case with a young adult or somebody with addiction who, has committed a petty crime, I might work with their attorney, get them treatment, try and get them some sort of diversion plan, because we don't want those individuals involved in the court at an early age. So I will work collaboratively with the families, with judges, with their attorneys to see if we can get better outcomes. I also work with a lot of school-avoidant children. I work very tightly with the school systems here in Hingham. I'm very well known around the teen population for arriving at one's house when they are refusing to get up to go out to school.
Oh, interesting.
We come up with little plans. A lot of it is mindfulness. I've utilized Opry, our comfort dog, to be a motivator, to get people out of bed and to get to school. Sometimes I'll meet them there. So it's really thinking outside the box for how I can work with them. I would have a lot of contact, as much as I can, with their individual therapists, because I'm allowed to have a perspective that they obviously don't have by seeing the family dynamics, going into the home, assessing in the moment. A big part of my job is diversion. So whether it's diversion from the jails and court system, or whether it's diversion from the ER. So we do, historically, the police officers and firefighters, their only outcome was to send an individual to the ER for assessment. So in my capacity, I will come in, I will help determine whether that individual needs to go on a Section 12 or not. And if not, which 80 to 90% of my calls, I will divert from the ER, reducing costs to the individual and to the town, and, freeing up beds for people in the ER that ultimately need them for medical treatment. So I will do a lot of follow-up with that family, reaching out to the therapist, determining what other services that they might need. But ultimately, a lot of what I do is, let's divert away from police involvement. The more active I am on a case, the less likely that the police are going to be called back. They don't always see those calls, but they'll remember that an individual hasn't been called to the police for the last few months, and that's because they've been calling me, or that they have now kind of completed whatever treatment I've offered them.
So your point of introduction with these families is through the police department,
Yes.
but then your follow-up is in your own capacity as the crisis response person for the town.
Yes. And as people have gotten to know me in the community, whether it's school personnel or parents, they'll reach out to me directly, and that's my preferred, that it's not going and rising to the level of a 911 call.
Can people reach out to you directly in advance, or does it have to? Okay.
Yes. And people will keep my number, or, I've noticed lately I'll have one mom say to another mom, have you heard about Aileen at the police department? If it's rising to that level, they'll reach out to me ahead of time. And that's the goal of the program, is that there is somebody available right away for them, rather than going to an ER or having to have it rise to the level of a 911 call.
Is this a common position? I think it's a relatively new position. Were you the first person hired for this position in the town?
I was the first person hired for this position, so I started the program back about 6 or 7 years ago. I have worked at other police departments and also been started their programs, so at Newton Police, and then I was at Weymouth also.
So it's a relatively new concept.
Yes.
And it almost seems as though it stemmed from maybe some pushback that the police department were getting, that they weren't addressing some of these very specific socio-emotional needs of the families that they were meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a case of, we only have, currently we only have South Shore Hospital in this area. We have Plymouth. A lot of hospitals are closing down. So it's not a solution to send them to the ER. And they often will get evaluated and then, they end up leaving. Whereas with my role, I can kind of follow them and provide some of that case management, if you will.
And in terms of your educational background, Liz just described her educational journey and what brought her into this line of work. What is your educational journey?
Well, I'm from Ireland, so I have a bachelor's in Irish and geography with the plan to be also a teacher. And then somewhere around 2003, I started getting interested in psychology and counselling, which was not something that, is talked about in Ireland. And everybody said to me, you know what, if you really want to be a counsellor, why don't you go to either America or go to London? Okay. So having experience and been here before, and this is where my parents met, I decided to apply to colleges here in Boston. So I came to Boston in 2003, graduated from Lesley University with my master's in 2006, and I've been working in the field of mental health or substance use for the last 20-something years. Mostly doing crisis work. I love to be, in the middle of the crisis, but I have worked in Spectrum in Weymouth, and I was the lead clinician on the campus out in Westboro for Spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I, gained a lot of experience working there, seeing, what people are struggling with.
So both of you have had the experience of seeing the connection between substance use and mental health. And there's a very strong connection we're discovering. Have you implemented any innovative techniques in the jobs that you do to address that connection between substance use and mental health? Anything sort of novel or cutting edge based on research, things that work, things that don't work?
I think more and more what we're seeing in terms of treatment is now organizations aren't separating the two, mental health and substance use. Mm-hmm. A lot of what is coming up is what's called dual diagnosis. So treating both the substance use and the mental health together instead of two separate problems. So I think keeping that in mind when you're talking to an individual is just really important. And I don't think it's necessarily innovative, but I think it's not something that every organization or every police department or every town or every treatment center is doing. I think it's becoming more and more popular. But what I think we need to continue to do is address mental health as a way of preventing substance use. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where Hingham Cares also does a great job, is that prevention of substance use. And, some of your speakers at Hingham Cares Day last year at the high school really spoke upon how your mental health comes into play when it comes to substance use, and how you're much more at risk of being addicted to a substance when you have prior mental health concerns. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that Aileen at the police department does really well. I think it's something that I do really well, that Hingham Cares does really well. So for the residents, the youth of the town of Hingham, the parents of the town of Hingham, anyone, I think they're really getting what, in my opinion, is some of the best care possible, because they have people in the town that they can turn to that understand the connection between the two, mm-hmm. and also will do their best to find them help that addresses both issues at once as well.
Do you think that concept of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, needs to be modified somewhat to incorporate this new thinking of the connection between mental health and substance use disorder?
Yeah, I think ACEs has, it's been expanded to look at all other kinds of trauma and stuff that's attached, then that can contribute. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never met somebody with a substance use disorder who probably could not be diagnosed with a mental health or anxiety or depression. Not necessarily they have been diagnosed, but they, struggle in those areas. Doesn't mean that anyone with a mental health disorder has definitely got an addiction.
Right.
But, it is happening more and more often, and we have to address both in order to help someone get sober.
And it's likely due to the fact that with a mental health concern, you're looking for ways to mitigate that mental health concern as an individual. And substances are the likely choice to help with that mitigation.
Right.
And when you find some success in using substances, then naturally you're going to keep returning to them and eventually that turns into an issue with addiction, substance use disorder.
Especially if you are predisposed, or you have all that trauma, depending on the environment, it works until it doesn't work, essentially.
Right.
I think another thing is access to care. I think a lot of what I have seen working in the field is you have an individual that's never had access to any sort of mental health care, or potentially grew up in a home where mental health wasn't talked about, or, never really understood what they were struggling with. And then it's, experimenting with a substance, and suddenly you find something that helps with any sort of symptoms that you've been experiencing from any type of mental health condition, and it's that self-medicating that leads to that addiction, because you've finally found something that helps out with those symptoms, but you're not aware of really what you're doing. Right. And how you're just, medicating symptoms that can be dealt with in a different manner. So I think it's access to care as well, but then also education surrounding these are what the symptoms of anxiety look like. These are what the symptoms of depression look like, or even, other mental health concerns, and what ages they typically present at, or what symptoms of other mental health conditions look like. I think it's education and it's access to care.
I think it's really critical for parents in particular to understand the connection between mental health and substance use disorder and that slippery slope that exists, because the younger somebody starts using a substance, the more inclined they are to become addicted to that substance long term, and you're almost exchanging one challenging situation for another challenging situation. So parent education is important in addition to educating youth. So do you draw upon your own personal experiences in the line of work that you're in?
Yes, I do. I am actually in recovery. I've been in recovery over 12 years.
Congratulations.
I recently celebrated, and I draw upon the experience I've had of getting sober and admitting that I had an addiction problem. And knowing what that's like to have that shame and that guilt of admitting that you had a problem. In my case, I was working in the field. So my work ended up helping me realize, I think, that indeed I did have a problem. I have a niece who I'm going home to Ireland to see, and she has never seen me drink. She was 6 months old when I realized that I needed to stop drinking. And that I needed to not be that aunt, is how I put it. And, that's when I entered treatment. And I used those experiences of both being in treatment and the stigma attached to help when I'm working with individuals, specifically in this town. Knowing how hard it is to admit it and come forward and be vulnerable, and then ask for help.
How long did that journey take for you? So you acknowledged that there was a concern with your alcohol use. You went into treatment. How long before you started feeling comfortable being open about your personal experience?
In my world, I think I divided between my professional world and my, personal. And I've been very open with people generally in my personal world. In my professional, I've had experiences where it's not been accepted, or where some shame and guilt has been put on me, and I feel judged. But at that being said, I feel like at this point in my sobriety, it's important that I share it with people more openly, because maybe that'll help somebody. I also think that it helps people to come forward when I've had other moms in the community share with me. It's usually met with a lot of guilt, a lot of crying, like, you're going to judge me, to which I can then share with them, on a need-to-know basis. I will share, no, I've been in your shoes, I've experienced that, and I am absolutely not here to judge you. I'm here to help you. and these are the things that I do to stay sober. And there's nothing I will suggest to somebody that I am not willing to do myself. Mm-hmm. And it's also good for me because, I might be saying, you need to go to X amount of meetings, or you need to reach out to your sponsor, and it's a reminder, oh boy, when's the last time I reached out to my sponsor? Maybe I need to do that today.
Right.
So, I think it's important because there is still so much shame and guilt associated with admitting that you have a problem. And I think problems, when you admit you have a problem, it can look very differently for different people. I grew up in Ireland where an alcoholic was an old man sitting under a bridge with a brown paper bag, and the only person in Galway to have a tan. And I learned that, it's not about how often you drink or, what your job is. It's about when you drink, how you drink. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was what happened when I drank. So I was not a daily drinker, but at the same time, I drank for effect. So I can relate to all those individuals who come in and, are struggling, because I've had those feelings and I've used alcohol to essentially not feel anything. Mm-hmm. So, it's good to have that experience. And, I can at least today say that I'm a sober woman, with honor and dignity, and I can help other women and men too, but specifically women, because I think there is a lot more shame and guilt associated with being an alcoholic woman than it is for a guy. So
right. Held to a different standard almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Were you one of those young people that started drinking at a young age? Were you looking to fill some sort of void or address some of your own wellness concerns?
So no, I was a good girl. I was an A student. I got into a good university. I didn't start drinking till it was legal to do so. But, I had periods in my life when, I would have friends say something to me about my drinking, and I was like, what are they talking about? Like, I'm drinking like everybody else. But truthfully, I wasn't. I was drinking to kind of curb some feelings, or I was drinking not to think about stuff. And, it went through phases, so it wasn't like all the time. But recently, well, not recently, it was probably 12, 13 years ago, I got divorced. And that kind of gave me, in my head, my permission to drink. And I lived alone. I lived 3,000 miles away from family who didn't know what was going on. And I drank for effect, and, I never became a daily drinker, thank God. I do believe that is something that could have happened. I didn't have any job losses. I didn't have any legal problems, but that's just through the grace of God that I didn't. I believe that, you get here when you get here, but I was lucky that I got here before any of those huge things happened.
Right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's really exciting. And I think, a lot of people who live a sober lifestyle really tout not just the health benefits, but the emotional benefits, the relationship benefits. Just your overall well-being is so improved when you live a sober lifestyle.
Well, I think everybody should be in a 12-step program because, we get to look at ourselves and we get to, by no means are my character defects gone, but I have a place where I can go, and I have people that will have no problem calling me out on it. And I think everybody, as I said, should have a place like this. My cousin recently went to an AA meeting, and she's not in recovery. She goes to celebrate me, and she goes to celebrate her friends. And she said to me, it's the only place I've been where people actually really care for each other and they really seem to support each other, which isn't what the real world feels like sometimes out there.
Right. That's wonderful. How about you, Liz? Is there anything in your personal life that you draw upon, or your personal experiences that you draw upon in your line of work?
Definitely. So I grew up with a single mother who is amazing, did everything in her power to give me everything I could want or need, but that didn't mean that we didn't struggle. So when I think about the way that I grew up, I think in my everyday world, I try to be the person that I wish that my mom had. In terms of, resources and referrals to places that would have made her life a lot easier and more manageable. So I think that I try to incorporate that into my everyday work, and any individual that I meet is, keeping in mind that that could be somebody's mom, that could be somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, and everyone deserves access to services that make life more manageable. I think that's the first way that I really draw upon my personal experience in my everyday work. And then I think the other way, I was also so severely bullied throughout high school. And I got to a place in college and, a little after college where I finally found a place where I felt like I fit in, but it wasn't the right place. I was waitressing and going out every night after work to shut down the bar and to drink with people, and it got to a point where I put myself in a lot of really dangerous situations. And I think, like a lot of kids, I truly thought that I was invincible and that nothing would ever happen to me, nothing would ever, that I wouldn't jeopardize my future, or that I wasn't doing anything wrong. And I think it really took my mom, and I can't even say that it was one time, but more than once, having to come to me and say, it's becoming a problem. You're coming home late at night, you're not coming home at all, to the point that you don't even remember what happened the night before. And it was happening too often, and I don't know what exactly it was that really clicked to me one day, but I just knew that I couldn't keep living that life and going out and drinking just to have a friend group and to fit in with other people and to feel like, I had finally belonged somewhere. So I left my waitressing job. I moved out of the town that I lived in. I stopped drinking overall and just had to work on, I think, myself a lot, and realize that I needed to give myself the love that I was searching for instead of searching for it somewhere else. And I think sometimes that's what a lot of youth are experiencing now, is potentially that feeling of not belonging somewhere. Right. And then you get invited to that party and you feel like you have to fit in with everybody else. And when you lack all of those things in your home or in your body, such as, self-love, self-worth, confidence, then you're willing to accept that from other people and whatever else that's damaging with it. Also, not take a look at where you're getting it from. So I think that would be something that I would really convey to anybody, is to, when you're struggling with anything or hanging out with the wrong crowd or feeling like you have to belong somewhere, is find it within yourself first before you go looking for it in the wrong place. Because I think it leads, we talked about the connection between mental health and substance use, but I think when you lack all of those things, and it's not a bad thing. I think more people have a problem with their self-confidence and their self-worth and self-love than, because it's not something that's easy to talk about. But I think just like mental health and substance use are connected, all of those things in substance use are connected as well. So I think that's just another thing that I draw on with my personal experiences, to remember that people can be really struggling internally, and I try to empathize with that as much as possible, and find them ways to practice gaining confidence, gaining self-love, gaining self-worth, because I think it goes a long way and helps to protect. It's one of those protective factors against, substance use.
I think there's so much pressure on kids, a lot of pressure on kids in Hingham in particular. We know that for sure. To be successful, to get into a good school, to have everything, the athletics, the job, the clubs, the grades, the everything. And if you don't meet that standard, then you feel like there's something wrong with you. Right. You feel like you need to almost overcompensate and look for ways to fit in. I think also there's always just historically been an issue with wanting to feel popular and not being satisfied with a handful of kids. Movies have been made about it. Yeah. Not being satisfied with just a handful of friends and looking for that larger popular group that does the fun, racy, questionable stuff and getting wrapped up in that. So you're making an excellent point that feeling confident in yourself and your own choices is such a strong foundation to have when going out into the world. Do you want to add something?
No, I think it's... Honestly, I think it's important to the parents place realistic expectations on their kids.
So you're jumping to my next question. My next question is, do you have any advice for parents on how to keep their children safe around substances? And I have start with Aileen and go to Liz. And there you go.
Oh, there you go.
Kicking it off.
Yeah, I think, I work with a lot of kids around town, and the parents' unrealistic expectations of, Johnny being, playing for the Bruins, or, their daughter skiing on some national team. Like, it's important to have extracurriculars, but I think it all needs to be done in a balance. Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing at the high school and what I'm hearing from kids themselves is by the time they get home from activities, it's maybe 7 or 8 at night. They're then, tired, and then they have to turn around and do a few hours of homework. Mm-hmm. I think that's not a balance, and I think it's important that kind of parents reel it in a little bit. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm big into is modeling. I think it's important that, especially in this community, that when it comes to substances, that if parents want their kids to do well and to make smart choices, that they model that good behavior. Mm-hmm. I've heard of games and such and town events where people are coming with alcohol. Serving anybody under 21 alcohol is illegal, and I think it's important that we don't just say things, that we actually show that we also do them ourselves. So that's kind of where I'd be coming from with the parents.
I definitely agree with Aileen. I think modeling is so important, showing that we can make good decisions, but I think also going further than that and having those open conversations about why we make the decisions that we do and how the decisions that we make affect our everyday life. The large idea within the youth population is this idea of invincibility, and where nothing's going to happen to us and nothing could ever go wrong.
And that's physiological too, because the brain is not fully developed. So that portion of the brain that controls rational thinking and rational decision making isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. And being a parent myself, you want to set the best example for your children, but I don't think setting the best example for your children is sheltering them from the mistakes that we've made as parents as well. And like I said, I think it plays into that modeling of, here's where I went wrong. This is maybe why I went wrong, or what happened where, when I made a bad decision, and having those open and honest conversations.
That's a great point.
So I think that's one of the most, important things. And then I think the other thing too, in being a toddler mom, I think it still comes into play when you're talking about teens and young adults is, every day my son is doing something new or getting into something new that I never thought that he could get into before. And I think keeping that in mind, my mom always used to say, like, I knew what you were going to do before you did it, and I've been there and I've done it 100 times. But to that, kids adapt and are coming up with new ways to hide things, new ways to, find things that, they want to find, or get access to things that, maybe we didn't have access to. So I think it's making sure that, prescription medication is locked up somewhere where like the code is not your birthday or your kid's birthday, making sure that access to alcohol is the same, either locked up somewhere, not just in a cabinet that we think that they can't reach, or, somewhere with easy access. So I think, modeling, not being naive, limiting access, those are all big points of advice that I would give a parent.
And then in terms of young people, do you have any specific advice for young people on how to make healthy choices around drugs and alcohol? We've kind of touched on them. We, as Hingham Cares, just recently put out a little summary of 10 pointers for kids to 10 proposed refusal skills that parents can discuss with their children. First one is say no. But as you pointed out, you need to have some element of confidence in yourself in order to effectively say, no, I don't want to do that. Use of humor, some other things were on that list. Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
What I would tell them is, you're not invincible. And I think one of the other helpful things is, will you be proud of the decision that you made in 10, 15, 20 years?
Especially if it ends up on social media.
Or will you be proud of the decision that you made tomorrow? Will you be happy with yourself in the decision that you made tomorrow? I think that's a hard thing to ask youth to do, is to reflect on those things, especially ahead of time. But I think the more that we educate students about their bodies, their minds, their decision-making skills, their overall well-being, the easier that will be to do.
Well, you're planting seeds, too.
Yeah.
And you never know when you say something to a young person what's going to resonate, what's not going to resonate. But if you're planting those seeds of truth and getting them to be a little bit more reflective, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you, Aileen? Do you have any advice for young people on how to make healthy choices around substances as you think about making your trip across the pond to see your niece?
I think a huge thing is playing the tape through, which isn't always easy for youth to do, but knowing the negative consequences of their decisions, playing it piece by piece to see where it would end up or where it has ended up for other youth. Because we have seen youth get into trouble. I do have she's a relative here, and she's 14. And her and I will have very honest conversations about consequences to chosen behaviors and, what could she have done different and who could she have spoken to prior to making a choice. And, I think it's important that we don't use fear as well. Fear isn't a great motivator for change. I think providing hope and showing that it can get better and that there are youth that have struggled and that have made it out the other side and been successful. So I think it's, a lot of what Liz said I resonated with, but also just kind of showing them that, their actions will have consequences. And as I said, on social media in this time, you don't want something to be posted that will be there forever.
Right.
So I just recently did a training with the district attorney, and that was something that they reiterate with teenagers is whatever happens in the moment, you don't know who's videotaping it, and it's up there for life.
That's right. That's right. Getting them to think, to be forward thinking and to think of the impact on their future selves is certainly a challenge, but it's not an impossible task.
No.
You make a good point about, living in the days of social media. Before social media, it was simply word of mouth that information would spread. But now it's out there for the masses. So, and future employers and future colleges and universities.
If you, I think, apply for military or any kind of first responder job or any, major corporation now, you're going to have your social media pulled. And what do you want people to see and know about you?
So I want to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been a really rich conversation. I think it's exciting for me, and I'm sure it will be exciting for others who are unaware of the positions that you hold in town, that you are in those positions. They do have access to you in a time of need, and that you bring such empathy and compassion to the work that you do. So I really appreciate your openness, your honesty, your vulnerability, and in your sharing with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been Substance Free 02043. I'm your host, Kristen Arute, and I hope that you will join us again. For more info or to get involved, go to hinghamcares.org.